Okay, and it's time for Ashok to read How to Love God. Jai Baba.
Jai Baba.
Ashok, you're on mute.
Avar Meher Baba ki jai. Uh, hope you all can.
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. How to love God. To love God in the most practical way is to love our fellow beings. If we feel for others in the same way as we feel for our own dear ones, we love God. If instead of seeing faults in others, we look within ourselves, we are loving God. If instead of robbing others to help ourselves, we rob ourselves to help others, we are loving God. If we suffer in the suffering of others and feel happy in the happiness of others, we are loving God. If instead of worrying over our own misfortunes, we think of ourselves more fortunate than many others, we are loving God. If we endure our lot with patience and contentment, accepting it as His will, we are loving God. If we understand and feel that the greatest act of devotion and worship to God is not to hurt or harm any of His beings, we are loving God.
Oh, you're not able to read the last line.
No, I can see now. To love God as He ought to be loved, we must live for God and die for God, knowing that the goal of life is to love God and to find Him as our own self. Avatar Meher Baba ki jai. Probably the seventh, sentence Baba wants us to, probably uh, pay more attention, and that's why there is something. So to love God as He ought to be loved, we must live for God and die for God, knowing that the goal of all life is to love God and to find Him as our own self. Avatar Meher Baba ki jai.
Absolutely. The last line is AI boils.
Yes, and that's why I was
Abide
wondering.
in Baba, our innermost loving selves.
Yes, our innermost loving. So you said it. I was just thinking about that, and I was wondering why, when I come to the seventh line, there was a small, screen on top of that, and which sort of went away. So Baba is trying to point us to the seventh. Is my feeling, Jai Baba.
Jai Baba. So we start with Listen Humanity. And for those of you who didn't sync up on Telegram yet, after some trial and error, I was able to get those files to actually download the audiobook, which, thanks to the tip from Sunil, I've been listening to it on the browser. But it's almost, I mean, it's far more comfortable if you're able to get it on your phones or get it on Teams and then listen to it wherever. So you can do that now because I've sent you both the audio the book folder link, and also put it on Teams so people can access it, and you can listen to it anytime. It's a beautiful audio file read out by Don Stevens. So we'll start the Listen Humanity. So just again as feedback, we've not been able to get the soft copy, but it's on everybody's agenda. So let's try to see if in time, by the time we finish this book, we should be ready to get started with different lectures in whatever form, ebook, physical, we'll figure it out. I think there's something there because just yesterday, Vidya sent me a talk that she did on different lectures, and I thought that was more than just a random coincidence. And I want to talk to her. I'm meeting her this week, so I will be talking to her more on how she got the book, because she actually used a Microsoft Word document and it had pages of it, and then she talked at length in English and Hindi. So more on that, we'll find out. But I see that as more than a coincidence, as I said, suggesting that we probably read different lectures sooner than later. Right. So with that, let me start. Um, I'll just quickly. I mean, it always helps to read the notes and forward, because it sets the period, it sets the context in which the book was written. So let's start with that so that we do this right. Avatar Meher Baba Ki Jai. I start with the acknowledgements. On the physical book, it's Roman page 3, and those of you are seeing on screen, you can see it. Acknowledgements. A work of this type is brought to completion only with the assistance of many persons. It is difficult. Let me increase the size a little more. Sorry. Yeah, this is better. Yeah. A work of this type is brought to completion only with the assistance of many persons. It is difficult to know just who should be gratefully acknowledged for their part in the collecting and editing of the original essays which were combined to form the body of part 2 of this volume. Certainly, Professor C.D. Deshmukh, best known for his editing of the discourses, and Adi K. Irani, Meher Baba's tireless secretary and manager of Meher Publications, played an extremely important role. In connection with certain other material included in part 2, grateful recognition is also given to Meher Publications, to Circle Publications, and to the Awakener for the use of portions previously printed by them. Part 1, which describes the Sahwas programs given by Meher Baba in India during November 1955, makes copious use of material faithfully transcribed at that time by Faram and Kishan Singh and later collated by Ramju Abdullah. Both Ramju Abdullah and Eruch Jasawala have made frequent suggestions and assisted greatly with clarifications in the final text. The sequence of events given in part 1 is approximately that followed by Baba in the first week. The sequence of events given in part 1 is approximately that followed by Baba. There's some grammatical problem in that sentence. The sequence of events given in part 1 is approximately the one that was followed by Baba in the first week. However, the various persons, incidents, and statements made by Baba were woven together from the entire 4 weeks program. The original on-the-spot translations of Baba's gestures made by Eruch have often been modified in the interest of continuity and a greater ease of perusal. There are also certain persons who have performed the invaluable service of offering suggestions from the viewpoint of the public. This especially difficult task has been faithfully performed by Meher Baba's sister, Manija S. Irani, by Murshida Ivy O. Deuce, and by Ben and Shirley Cotright. Finally, the entire contents of the volume have been approved by Meher Baba. It cannot be pretended that therefore everything is as Meher Baba would have described it himself, nor that Meher Baba necessarily agrees completely with certain expressions of opinion which have inevitably been the narrators. However, the reader can be assured that the major content of the volume is as given directly by Meher Baba, and that the remainder finds some point of acceptance or at least tolerance by him. So this was first done in February of 1957 when Don Stevens was still in the US. So it's Red Bank, New Jersey. And from there is an introduction. An introduction usually discusses the background of the contents of the volume or of its author. In the present instance, it seems desirable to upset this precedent and discuss the reader instead. This work is directed towards that very large group of people who want answers to their living problems. Perhaps it may seem odd to go to India for such answers. Actually, it is not. The East has labored for thousands of years to find the keys to life so that daily living could be patterned in consonance with them. The East has perhaps not yet found perfection, nor its people the perfect way. However, they do provide a background of sincere effort and insight, which is almost unique in the world. From that background, one could expect great individuals to emerge who would be especially fitted to teach us how to live. Meher Baba is clearly one of those invaluable persons. One has only to be in his presence for a short time to sense the mighty forces at work in him. One has only to be for a few days with his close disciples to know that his greatness flows readily into other persons. One has only to be in India for a short time and to look and listen with sympathetic eyes and ears to know that the spiritual greatness of India springs from roots which lie deep in the hearts of its people. The rub for the Occidental lies in the method of applying these living insights. This is where the present reader must be discussed. When he thinks of India, he thinks perhaps of a poor people, often illiterate, given to complicated superstitions. When he thinks of India's religious life, he sees ancient temples populated by many gods. Or, if he plumbs a smaller area of knowledge, he recalls odd yogis and mystics given to strange practices. This is the screen of partial or incorrect understanding through which one must pierce to draw on India for insight into Western man's problems. The task seems almost too great, for ingrained notions yield only grudgingly. Yet India does have, buried in the great mass of extraneia, a profound knowledge of man's purpose, and this the West needs desperately. An astoundingly small proportion of people in the Western world know why they are here, and not knowing why they are here, few know how to start their lives with a sense of vigorous, dependable purpose. Instead, life becomes a matter of energetic effort to solve today's needs. If tomorrow comes to mind, it can only be looked upon as an extension of today's problems. It is no wonder that nervousness and irritability are produced. It is also no wonder that thinking, feeling people are dissatisfied and ask in their hearts what it is all about. But where can they find the answers? Apparently, not in a wild negative bout with life. That was tried in the 1920s, and the results were so unsatisfactory that the next generation turned its back and began again to look for a positive answer. Apparently, the answers can't be found in ritual, form, or ceremony. This is a matter of the spirit, and to tend to the needs of spirit requires men of spirit. But if there are not too many of these, where can they be found? And how can their answers be turned into answers for us? This is the great dilemma of a war-weary, soul-weary age. If India has clues which could be of help, how can they be used? Certainly, it is not in harmony with Western traditions to build temples with many armed gods and goddesses. Nor is it in the Western tradition to engage in strange practices of breath or posture so that one may do impossible physical feats. Rather than attracting the Occidental, such habits are apt to repel him. If the East is to be of any help, it must be able to give Western man something which can be welded into his practical daily life. It cannot divorce him from his family and turn him into a lone whirling dervish, nor can it give him odd notions which will allow him to earn a living in conventional business. This is the real problem in trying to translate any Eastern answers into Western words. It has often been said that the great world religions are furthest apart in their formal parts and closest together in their true spirit. This seems true and provides a clue by which the West may draw on the heritage of the East. It is the spirit which is needed, and form becomes only a meaningless husk to be discarded. It is not necessary for the Occidental to take up breathing exercises, postures, diets, or the murmuring of sacred phrases. It is true that an unbiased analysis of such practices usually leads to the conclusion that they do produce astonishing results. However, in large part, they are aside from the matter of spirit, which is the nub of the issue. The first part of this volume describes how the great contemporary spiritual leader Meher Baba transferred something of this spirit to a picked group of his close lovers, of his close followers in India. The Western reader will be struck by the fact that there was almost nothing of ritual, dogma, or strange practices involved. Yet, the sessions produced results, often remarkable results. The narrator, for instance, who has perhaps been a rather crusty person over the years, was told by many friends upon his return how much more enjoyable he had suddenly become. Such comments were made both by persons who knew of the nature of his stay in India as well as those who did not. Apparently, then, there is a way of transferring some shade of spiritual greatness without use of elaborate form and ritual, which would be repugnant to much of Western civilization. Further, there are apparently such resources presently available in the world which can be drawn upon. This is an important fact to each person who searches for a more certain meaning to life. The first contribution to a searching reader can be the reassurance that such wholesome answers exist. The second contribution, given in part 2, is a description of the nature of life and death, sleep and waking, love and obedience. The third contribution is a very intriguing one, which is first suggested early in the Sehwas program described in part 1. Meher Baba makes no bones about referring to himself as the avatar or Christ of his age. Nothing could be more surely calculated to arouse the argumentative instincts of the Occidental. In the first place, many doubt that there ever was such a person as Jesus Christ, or at least that he had anything of the stature attributed to him. Second, the time for such events always seems to be in the past. To have someone jolt the present with such a rude claim seems a deliberate challenge to a sense of modern rationality. A third attitude often encountered is that Jesus Christ was the one and only Son of God, and there will not be another. Finally, there is a deeply ingrained conviction that if Christ should come again, good breeding would cause him to avoid claiming that he was the Christ. For all of these reasons, it is upsetting to find a man of undoubted stature state with candor that he is the Christ. It is always easier to deal with such claims in the past. To have them occur today presents a challenge of frightening dimensions. There is hardly a person reared in Christendom who is not jeered in his heart at the Pharisees for not having recognized Christ's stature, or at least for not having treated him fairly. By implication, if one condemns a person who may turn out to be the modern Christ, then one becomes a modern counterpart of the biblical Pharisee. On the other hand, if one mistakenly accepts a man to be Christ, then one has committed a major blunder which may have far reaching consequences in one's personal life. This peculiar dilemma in which the individual is placed explains largely the violent explosivity of the issue. The greater the obvious caliber of the man, the greater the explosivity. And Meher Baba is certainly no mean man. Section 1 is liberally sprinkled with Meher Baba's references to his divine stature. It is suggested that the reader deliberately put this question on file as he reads part 1 and allow the personality and the heart of the man to speak for themselves. Part 2 will provide much additional material to estimate Meher Baba's qualities. Part 3, in turn, is an attempt on the part of the narrator to describe his own estimation of this extremely important and knotty subject. The age of jet transport and atomic power does not render the question of Christhood obsolete, but brings it more insistently to the forefront. Mankind will need such a superhuman force in the world to dispense the clarity and balance needed to equate against the superhuman questions it now faces. If God did not provide a means for answering the questions he allows man to raise, it would be an unreasonable world in which he forces us to live. But there is reason to believe that those answers do exist in the great nation which specializes in the inner springs of man's nature, India. Stripped of the refuse which the centuries produce, paired of inessentials which serve only to separate man from man, and reduced to the hard core of the spirit, the answer can emerge from the wisdom of that land. The answer would not be a new one, but it would be a vital infusion into the lifeless stalks which once bore up in man the ripe knowledge of his own purpose and dignity. It's a very interesting journey of an introduction. So he starts with very interesting skepticism and then moves on. And so he's also setting the stage very clearly on what to expect in the 3 parts, which I hope everybody has registered. I had one question from this, in fact, maybe 2. First one is, so what he's referring to in the failed attempt to understand ourselves in the 1920s, he's more referring to the West. Is that the reference to the drugs and the psychedelics and the music movement? And I think, is that what he's referring to here? I'll show you the phraseology. Yeah, here it is. Apparently not in a wild negative bout with life. That was tried in the 1920s, and the results were so unsatisfactory that the next generation turned its back and began again to look for a positive answer. I'm guessing that's what it is, but I don't know. The wild ones can answer. The wild young ones.
It could be the Wild West as well. Karthik, it's
No, I doubt. I don't think it's a reference to Wild West. Wild West is a different phraseology, right? It's completely yeah.
If you remember, if you read about the American civilization or America during the late 1900s, what you call between 1850, let's say 1870 to 1930, or even 19 before World War One. We understand that there is a lot of progress in the Industrial Revolution, and many of the scientific theories, laws of matter, were discovered. And many inventions also happened, including quantum mechanics in 1910, around that time. But also, if you remember that Coke used to be having cocaine, actually, right? In fact, one of the controversies that Coca-Cola, the recipe is supposed to be patented, and it's a secret, trade secret. And I don't want to speculate on that. But in those days, drugs were very freely available. In fact, for any ailment, morphine, opium, and all that were freely administered. Many of the cough syrups and all were very addictive, you could say that. Even we had the Benadryl, if you remember, is actually very addictive, And so there was a time, and you remember the prohibition, where just like we have in Gujarat, that was another thing that was instituted later. But there was a lot of experimentation going on during that time, especially in the medical field. So I think that is one aspect that is pointing out, because we see the same thing happening today, where prescription drugs, that is the politically correct name for painkillers. And these painkillers are basically opioid drugs, yes. And there is one firm in, I believe, not Illinois, Indiana, probably. They got fined $4 or $5 billion, but they got away. Johnson & Johnson admitted and paid a big fine. And this other company fought because they have lobbyists. So United States of Asuras is basically a military industrial complex, okay, run by multinational corporations with lobbyists. So the drug thing that has been happening, in some places, now marijuana is legalized in many states. Canada is legalized at Alaska and, in some parts of Europe. But one of the biggest challenges, private corrections and all that in US, it's a big business. So the drug culture is sustained. Look at Afghanistan. Basically, it's the biggest producer of opium and heroin and all that. So, you can't trust any of these guys. You can't trust the media. You can't trust. Now you can only trust Meher Baba. That is what it's all about. So I think it's referring to that time. Actually, even the 1910s, right from the time Vivekananda landed up, till then the Sufism reoriented started by Hazrat Inayat Khan, right? Then 1920s, Avatar Babaji and Sri Yukteswar sent Yogananda, who started the Self-Realization Fellowship, the Kriya Yoga practice in 1920s. And then, of course, Meher Baba landed up in 1931. So I look at these time range from 1890, from the time that Vivekananda gave the talk in Chicago, till the time that Meher Baba traveled between 1931 to 1956. There has been this meeting of the East and West, and there was a lot of spirituality that time. The Theosophists, basically, you could consider a very good example of, in a way, almost like a Babaism, you can call it. But they got caught up in their own prophets and Messiah and all that. But so coming back to your question, yes, this is about the legalization of drugs, basically. Everything was available those days. Yeah, there was.
Cool. And I'm sure all of us recognize the deep impact that Baba's had on the drugs just by, seeing the number of people that have come into the Baba fold from the West, especially the older ones that you might have all met. All of them had some, linkage back with drugs. Very strange, very telling, but then Baba had them really pulled out of their misery. And of course, it has changed their life in dramatic ways. But then the impact of what Baba worked in the West against the problem of drugs is very little understood by those of us here. We can't even relate to how Kama's comments were very, very insightful and detailed. But then the problem was that big back in those days, the drugs problem. And then I think Baba had a big role in shaking that off and ending that. There are people that Baba's photographs were on bus stops, right? They had posters with Baba's photograph and messages in the 1920s when nobody knew about this, and some people were drawn by those posters. I know of stories like that, and then they gave up drugs, and so on and so forth. It's fascinating to understand his role in this whole thing, right? The second question I had was if anybody can help on what that biblical reference is. I've never seen that before. Pharisees. So has anybody any thoughts on that?
What's the question?
There is a biblical reference to people who denied Christ, and the reference is to a clan of people called Pharisees. I've never heard of that before. So if there is, I mean, it's less important. If it's
It's
okay, we can look
Parsis.
it up.
It's Parsis.
Oh,
It's
is it
basically
Parsis?
Persian. Yeah, it is. I think the way it is written, but if you read about the history of Christianity, it took
Uh-huh.
quite a while to get established. With Saint Constantine, there is something called the family. I'll send you the link. I was just recently reading about it because I was very curious how Christ became popular. It took a long time. It took almost 150 years to make it much more publicly that Jesus Christ became a
Acceptable.
public figure through that Roman emperor who moved from Rome to Constantinople, which is now called Istanbul. So Constantinople is based on the name Constantine, that is the Emperor Constantine.
Yeah.
And so there were many, many, many factions, believe it or not, during that how Christianity progressed. Just like Buddhism, if you look at Buddhism, the pure Buddhism in my book is Vipassana. Universal law of nature is impermanence. Focus on your breath and observe, don't react to pleasant, unpleasant, and no sensations, which is what Baba is talking about, renunciation of desires. So this is a great correlationship out here. But there is a booklet called God in a Pill, which was circulated during the 60s, early 60s, right from the time the New York World Fair and then the Montreal World Fair, which you are referring to. But the biblical reference definitely, every operating system right now, as we know, Baba, how many people know Baba? Less than a million,
Yeah.
0.01%. So it will take its own shape. There will be Babaism later on. We don't know how it will. Right now, Baba clearly said that no organizations, no centers, the heart is your center. If a couple of people meet together, that's it. So, Jai Baba.
Yeah. Absolutely. So I think one thing that I forgot to mention, and I don't think you also alluded to it directly, Kama. So the funny part is the drugs were not just as a way of escape or for therapeutic purposes, like Kama referred. They were also very clearly a way of a supernatural experience and a way to God for a majority of the users of psychotropic substances, which was strange. I mean, we don't relate to that very highly in India, except if you're, the agoras and in the Himalayas and so on, right? But this movement in the West was very, very real. They really thought that you get to some sort of God state, or you can persist in those states with the use of substances. So it's funny. Funny
But
now,
but
but it
but
was real.
just to add what you're saying, it actually started off with LSD with Timothy
LSD,
Leary
yes.
and that guy Ramdas, who sits in Hawaii now. Ramdas met Neem Karoli Baba, and he asked him, "What do you have? Look, those pills." So those were very strong LSD pills, and Neem Karoli Baba popped about 8 or 9, and nothing happened to him, and he was just lying there because he was a non-realized being. And Ramdas, I forgot his American name, Doctor something. They were two guys, Timothy Leary, and they were banned from Harvard, both of them from Harvard, I believe. And so LSD took off because they experimented with that. And LSD definitely gives you those kind of experiences of what I would call the planes. Can't describe it. It is quite different. And also in South America, there is certain kind of mushrooms that they use in certain rituals actually to help certain people get over their phobias and something like that. There are naturally growing herbs which help people to get over physical, mental issues. But when it gets abused, like what happened with drugs, because morphine is good, we use it in the medical industry, but it went into heroin and then to hard drugs, and now there is all kinds of hard drugs out there, and America is going through that big in the southern states, especially the blue states, which have high poverty levels. So the drug culture is something that is even going on now. We see that. So it's not just about psychotropic drugs. Any kind of drug, even drinking alcohol, is also addictive. So Baba said, if you can avoid all these things. Actually, Baba said to people who had psychotropic drugs, like people who had LSD, there are some very good references to that when 4 or 5 Americans who had come to visit Baba during his silence time between 65 and 69, where this discussion was done. And then Baba said, it's okay if you experiment with it, but it's not going to give you, it's only a temporary kind of trance. Just like in meditation, he also says, if somebody just goes into a trance, no big deal. Those are not important things. Jai Baba.
Absolutely.
Jai Baba, Karthik.
Yeah, sure.
See, if you just go a little ahead, a little up, there's a paragraph which says, it has often been said that the great world religions are furthest apart.
Up, down.
Up,
I don't
little
know.
up.
Okay.
Up. I think.
Little more. Okay.
Little more. Little more. No, sorry. Come down. Come down.
Okay. Further down.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm sorry. This is paragraph which begins. It has often been said that the great world religions are furthest apart in their formal parts and closest together.
Yes, that is a beautiful line. That is I think. Yeah. I know what you're referring to. I don't know where it is.
Okay, so what I would want to highlight to the group is that here Baba is alluding to the East and the West coming together, and Baba had also taken, had given a lot of importance to the East and the West meet. So, the main essence of this is that all are one. All of us are one. All souls are one, whether in the East or the West.
Absolutely.
So I think that's what comes out of this, and this line is also very profound. It is the spirit which is needed, and form becomes only a meaningless husk to be discarded.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I'm unable to get it here on the.
Yeah. I know that line as well, but I don't know where it is. Yes. Yeah, there it is. It is the spirit which is needed, and form becomes only a meaningless husk to be discarded.
Paragraph. Can I especially it's very.
Yeah, so this is the other line you wanted, right? This is the real problem trying to translate any Eastern answers into Western words. It has often been said that the great world religions are furthest apart in their formal parts and closest together in their true spirit. This seems true and provides, I think, mics have to go on mute. This seems true and provides a clue by which Sunil's mic, I think, should go on mute. This seems true and provides a clue by which the West may draw on the heritage of the East. It is the spirit which is needed, and form becomes only a meaningless husk to be discarded.
So it's very profound, I found, and it's a message by Baba that we all have to collaborate to bring the East and the West together.
Yeah. But then,
take us
Don,
Jai Baba. Ashok,
Jai Baba.
take us with you to America. We also want to combine East and West.
Jai Baba.
Yeah, please, Ashok. We are all ready. So Tell us. I'll send you my passport. Book my tickets.
A good resolution. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Good.
Namitaji. Yeah, Baba.
So I also noticed that Don is pretty cheeky in this introduction, as you might have also figured. He starts. He even says Christ would have not said he's the Christ if he comes again, which is Meher Baba. So so he's pretty cheeky in this introduction, but we'll indulge him. We'll let him go, right? So anyway, so with that, we have this last little introduction, and then we'll get into the first part. Introduction to the colophone edition. I don't know what colophone is. What's colophone? No idea. 15 years have passed since the occurrence of the events described in the first part of this volume. During that time, the word of Meher Baba has raced around the world as he had predicted it would. Tens of thousands of devotees, as well as the interested and the curious, have made pilgrimages to the centers most closely associated with him near Ahmednagar in India and near Myrtle Beach in South Carolina. Again, all this is as he had said it would be. Meher Baba dropped the body during this time in January 1969 and was entombed in Mehrabad in the small building erected and decorated at his order years before. At the time of his entombment, and again during April-June of 1969, he gave his darshan at Guru Prasad in Pune and at Mehrabad and Mehrazad to his lovers who flocked to his side from all over the world in obedience to his invitation. Many, perhaps all, had wondered how arrangements for this great darshan, which were made while he was in the flesh, could be carried out with anything more than sorrowful obedience after he had left the body. Perhaps its accomplishment was the great event never witnessed before and never to happen again, that he had predicted the year before. And if it was not, and that occurrence is yet to happen, the projection of his presence was nevertheless so real and so forceful that he seemed to fill all of the space as well as all of the hearts at Guru Prasad, Mehrazad, and Mehrabad. They had come expecting sorrow and left filled with a lightness and joy most had never known. But these recitations of the fulfillment of things to come leaves one important blank. What about the breaking of the silence which Baba commenced in 1925 and which he repeatedly linked to his manifestation? He had not audibly done so when his body lay lifeless on January 31. Was this a great omission, or had the entire 44 years of his silence been a masterstroke of technique to shake people up and help them start to focus on the great reality? To the first question, certainly not. To the second, most probably yes. But a being as sublime as Meher Baba appears never to act within the restrictions of one sole aim. It takes little time in his presence to sense that he is everywhere at once, and his actions have a concentrated impact at many levels and points. When the entire story is in and one looks at the available facts, I feel one must draw the conclusion that Meher Baba did break his silence and manifested during his lifetime. Others, whom I deeply respect, feel differently. In any event, there will be hundreds of learned treatises on this subject in the future. It is not my purpose in this brief introduction to present one of the earliest of these analyses, but I do wish to record a few keys to this enigma, certain of which depend upon observations in the present. Meher Baba often said that when he broke his silence, he would say the only meaningful word, and that this would shortly be followed by his manifestation. Tradition, arising from thousands of years of profound spiritual activity, gives us certain keys to help understand the enigma of his words. Many sources describe the origin of creation by saying, first there was the Word, or something similar. How curious that Meher Baba would say that when he broke his silence, he would say the only meaningful word. Tradition also tells us that it is part of the job description of the messenger of God that he shall renew the word when dharma has decayed. Baba has said many times that this was his responsibility in his lifetime. Clearly, then a more basic meaning of word and the breaking of the silence to give the only real word has to do with the fundamental thrust of creation at all levels. But still another intriguing clue, Baba describes the origin of creation as the whim of God stirring him to know his divinity consciously and compares it to a wave surging across the stillness of infinite, unconscious God. A wave does not leave absolute calmness in its wake, but a succession of diminishing waves behind it. What is all of creation but a vast variety of different species of wave disturbances? What is sound but a wave disturbance? And finally, the key, what is a word but a wave disturbance? The train of association moves on inescapably. What more apt way to describe the origin of God's creation than to say, first there was the Word, and if one is the avatar, the messenger of the age, whose role it is to renew and revivify God's word, what more profound way can there be to break a silence than to give renewed impetus to the original sound, which was the origin of all creation? An audible word is dwarfed into meaninglessness in relation to a function so fundamental. All this is fascinating theory, but the honest inner workman of the present and future will ask, what evidence was there in Baba's lifetime for a renewed vitality in creation? A fair question. My specialty is people and what goes on inside them. If I could say anything meaningful in relation to the question, it would have to be based on observation within my specialty. In the 1930s and 1940s, when I first became deeply involved in man's inner being and how it progresses, it seemed to me that internally aware individuals were either rare or not very evident, and that in any case, internal motion was extremely slow at best. In the 1950s, this began to change. There were obviously more people searching, and they tended to be more vigorous in their search. By mid-1960s, there were thousands, and their rate of motion was astonishing. It was evident that Meher Baba's new humanity was literally at hand. From then on, there was no question in my mind that Meher Baba's true manifestation was already in flood tide. It only remained to trip across a few clues to the word and the breaking of the silence contained in the Bible and among others in Guru Nanak's utterances to round out the picture. Then all of Baba's cryptic, intriguing, almost abrasive statements on his silence appeared to fall into place. The footnote, Nanak, the inspiration for the Sikh movement, stated in a variety of ways that as creation arises from the word of God, so it is also possible for the individual soul to return to God through the word. The word is both an outward motion and a returning motion. I think it's the Shabad, right? This says Shabad. And there's another footnote on the darshan. Meher Baba had made detailed plans for a great darshan, literally a bestowing of spiritual blessing by the master for many thousands of new and old devotees to be held in Pune in April, June 69. His close disciples of Mandali carried out those plans with results that will form part of the great lore of Baba through the centuries. Yeah, so last page. We are living in the flood tide age when God's whim to know his own divinity consciously has been given another great push within creation. Things are happening to man's inner being at a rate that could not be conceived of 20 years ago. Ours is the responsibility to look to this being who has given us once again this great forward push, and by the reality of our devotion within his love, to make the most of this new springtime of humanity. Not only is it a springtime because of the release of new vigor within creation and because of the freshness of the example of the Christ figure itself, but because it is also the end of a cycle of destruction and suffering on a colossal scale. It is not only Meher Baba, but it is he, most clearly of all, who tells us that all of creation is now moving on under the avataric touch into an age when not only the deserving, but the undeserving as well will have their chance at divine grace. All one must do in the shower of spiritual rain that is now descending is to be alert to the opportunity that is about one. How magnificent it is to sense the slowly thinning pall of gloom and destruction, and to sniff the moist, fresh air that already gives hint of the rainbow in the heavens. John Stevens, by which time he was in London, and this is in September 1970. And this is that particular line is from Message of Cheer and Hope to the Suffering Humanity, from Messages by Meher Baba given in Ahmednagar in 1945. So I think this is a very good exploration of the breaking of the silence. I had not read this before, and obviously it's one of the intriguing Baba topics, and I think he takes a good shot, a good crack at describing this. So I thought that's interesting.
Jai Baba Karthik.
Yeah.
I think this phrase is not only Meher Baba, but is most clearly of all who tells us that all of creation are moving on under the avataric age into an age when not only the deserving but the undeserving as well will have their chance at divine grace. That again I think can it be correlated to the new world order the chapter which we have in discourses. I think it's got a correlation there.
Yeah, that's got a correlation there. But then also in 1970, he's already smelling the rain and he's saying the pall of gloom is thinning. Well, 50 years later, the pall of gloom is still loud and clear. The new world order is still to come in. So I think it's all happening in Baba's time. We just accept it as it is. But the line that you referred to gave me hope. Undeserving also have a chance. So there you go.
Yes.
Karthik has a chance.
Everyone, everyone. And also to explain what is a colophone. The colophone.
Yeah, let me look it up.
No, I just have it in my. If you can read
Okay,
it.
great. Please read.
It's a noun, a publisher's emblem or imprint, usually on the title page of a book. And his historical meaning is a statement at the end of the book, typically with a printer's emblem, giving information about its authorship and printing. It's something to do with the book itself.
Okay, so did they have that in this edition for the first time? What are they talking about? No idea. I don't get it. So if it's something on the physical book and the introduction to in 1970 talks about the colophone edition, did the earlier editions didn't have it? I don't know. Anyway, it doesn't matter. It's minor. Thank you for looking up. So yeah, so with that we go to the theme. The theme. There's no creature which is not destined for the supreme goal, as there is no river which is not winding its way towards the sea. But only in the human form is consciousness so developed that it is capable of expressing the perfection of its own true self, which is the self of all. However, even in the human form, the soul is prevented from realizing its birthright of joy and fulfillment because of the burden of sanskaras which it has accumulated as a byproduct of its arduous development of consciousness. Like the dust that accumulates on the shoes of a traveler on foot, these sanskaras are gathered by the pilgrim as he treads the evolutionary path. In the human form, which is the crowning product of evolution, the divine life is enmeshed in the sanskaric deposits of the mind. The expression of the divine life is therefore curtailed and distorted by the distractions of the sanskaras, which weld consciousness instead to the fascinations of the false phenomena. One by one, the many-colored attachments to the false must be relinquished. Bit by bit, the sanskaric tinder feeding the deceptive flames of the separative ego must be replaced by the imperative evidence of the unquenchable flame of truth. Only in this manner can man ascend to the height of divine attainment, the endless beginning of life eternal. The life in eternity knows no bondage, decay, or sorrow. It is the everlasting and ever renewing self affirmation of conscious, illimitable divinity. My mission is to help you inherit this hidden treasure of the self. Avatar Meher Baba. So let's get going. So there are 6 parts here, which is more a narration of the events around the Sahwas. And then you have some messages, that's part 2. And then, like explained in the introduction, there's 3 chapters in part 3 about avatarhood. So that's what we can expect in this book. Any questions, comments before I start? Okay, no. So chapter 1, Meherabad. Let's get started. Avatar Meher Baba ki jai. Chapter 1, Meherabad. Old men, young men, middle-aged men greeted the silent master in the characteristic embrace reserved in the East for close friends. First, the new arrival would hang his head over the right shoulder of the great man to be patted or occasionally warmly thumped on the back. Then shoulders would be switched and the procedure repeated. Some leaned their cheeks on the great man's shoulder and held him gently in the small of the back with lightly pressed hands as a child reaches and clings to its mother. Others were left shoulder oriented rather than right shoulder oriented, and for a brief moment, confusion would ensue as greeter and greeted parried directions. But apparently, heaven is not particularly partial to the right-handed over the left-handed, for the master made no attempt to correct the situation and thumped just as heartily in the reverse order. Occasionally, some overflowing of feeling would cause one of the greeters to overstay, and imperceptibly, the warm-hearted thumping on the back would change to a good-humored prod in the ribs. The smile of bliss would change equally imperceptibly to a brief grin of embarrassment, and the shy guest would walk back away with covert glances to the side to see if he had been detected in his small indiscretion. The hall in which the greetings were taking place was one of a collection of buildings called Meherabad. They lay on the edge of Arangaon, a small farming village several miles from Ahmednagar, which in turn had been an old fort post of the British Army in bygone days of Eastern Empire. Ahmednagar lay in the Deccan, perhaps 200 miles by meandering, human-packed roads from Bombay. The present occasion was an event uncommon even in a land renowned for avatars, Christ, and saints and mystics. Here was a great master, perhaps more than that, greeting a picked group of his followers who were to spend 1 week of rare grace by living in close company with him as he discoursed, played, joked, exercised, and rested, a true Sehvas. This was not a common practice, and the Indian mind regarded it as a treasure to be dreamed of, but achieved only once in many lifetimes. Savas is literally living in close companionship with the spiritual master. These were the very first arrivals of a first group of 200. At the end of a week spent in the close company of the master, a second group of 200 was to arrive, and so on until the four major the language groups of Gujarati, Telugu, Hindi, and Marathi had been successively received for a week each. But even this early in the proceedings, Pendu, who supervised the physical arrangements for the Sehvas proceedings, was muttering because Meher Baba seemed unable to say no to a flood of entreating letters begging that the writers also be allowed to come. Already the first group was swelling beyond 200 souls, and it seemed that the matter could not possibly be gotten under control until 300 at least had been allowed to come. Pendu's worries over the job of providing more steel sheets for shelter and more pulse for food and more matting for beds did not concern the rapt hundred already present. They showed only the widest of delighted smiles as each person moved with unconscious grace and simple dignity in a line formed down the center of the room. Although the group had been selected for its common language background, their dress defied all semblance of similarity. Some wore white cloth draped deep around one leg and high on the other. Others wore white pants so full and sheer that they seemed to form a solid floor-length skirt, while a few wore real full-length skirts. European trousers were much in evidence, and accenting the whole were the occasional robes of the priest and the wanderer. Many carried garlands of fresh flowers, which they hung about Meher Baba's neck. Others carried homemade candies, or oranges, or coconuts, or even portraits of Baba. All of these gifts Baba smilingly accepted and passed on to one of the close disciples, Mandali. There is a map, Pimpalgaon, Baba's Hill, Ahmednagar, the fort, Upper Mehrabad, and Lower Mehrabad are here. Let me read that last line. All of these gifts Baba smilingly accepted and passed on to one of the close disciples, Mandali, at his side. Sometimes an exclamation would break out by way of abrupt gesture as Baba spied an especially cherished friend. Often there would be a brief interlude of quick questioning as he inquired about health or welfare of some family member. Despite the apparent handicap of substituting fluid gesticulation for speech, Meher Baba's silence of 30 years standing slowed the rate of his repartee not one whit. With only minor hesitations, Baba's gestures were caught and translated with uncanny ease by Eruch, one of the devoted Mandli. When no more than half the receiving line had been pared away, Baba became wearied with standing. Abruptly, he turned and walked back to a large chair set against the wall at one end of the room. Like a mobile centipede, the sinuous lines of greeters followed immediately upon its prey and once resumed its functioning of splitting off one segment after another in the ritual of salutation. Without warning, the even flow of feeling was interrupted at one point, and all in the room focused their attention on the frowning Baba and the apprehensive, uneasily shifting individual before him. Do you have a cold? Erich translated Baba's gestures. Only a very small one, was the low-pitched reply. Do you have a sore throat? Baba queried further. A little. And your nose runs? Also a little. And while you are like this, you would embrace Baba and give him a cold too? Baba persisted. Oh no, Baba, came the horrified reply, and hesitantly, with jerky movements born of torn emotions, the individual backed away from his favorite position at the head of the line. Suddenly, Baba's features softened and he gestured again. Perhaps tomorrow your cold will have improved and you can greet me with the remaining people who are yet to come. Mandali are close disciples who follow the instructions of the master implicitly. See Appendix 2 for discussion of the susceptibility to disease of saints, sages, and the God realized. Maybe at the end of this chapter, we'll go to that appendix, given it's not directly relevant. Once more, the line began to move, and soon the sense of running rivulets of feeling was everywhere again. The room filled with soft humming overtones, the muted cellos, and the lowly vibrating basses of deep human emotion. From front to back and back to front, the rhythm changed and the key modulated by the moment in the fast-moving drama of human feeling. Have you all read the instructions at the back of the room? Baba asked when the last member had been greeted. Okay, so there's a reference to read Appendix 1 and 2, so we'll read that. A majority nodded their heads in assent, but a few shocked them in negation. Anyone who has not read the instructions should do so, Baba pursued. I want everyone to be sure to read them before I come tomorrow morning. Now, I will leave you and I will be here tomorrow morning at 8:30. If you find something which is not to your liking, be sure to let Baba know. I want you all to be happy. Do not worry about your families or your business. If you think of them, then you are with them and you are not with Baba. While you're here, enjoy yourself, enjoy Baba, forget your cares. He rose from his chair and strode out of the hall, a hurrying stream of hangers-on trying to keep pace with him as he walked rapidly to the waiting blue car. A few smiles and waves from the window, and he was gone. Eruch and several of the other Mandali in the back seat. They would spend the night at Beharazad, some miles on the north of Ahmednagar. On the long, narrow verandas on either side of the hall, small knots of old and new friends exchanged pleasantries. In the hall itself, opposite Baba's ponderous armchair, a smaller cluster carried out the injunction to read the instruction sheets for the Sehwas programs. One man droned on in oddly accented English to his patient companion. I want you to read carefully and absorb these instructions. The sun sank below the far line of low hills, and the cowherd children from Arangao hard by began to drive their charges back across the poor open pasture and down along the railroad tracks towards the tiny poverty-ridden village. The combed clouds in the east took on soft oranges and then reds and shifted to violets and blues as the intense color of sunset ruby shifted to the mid heavens. Slowly, the color concentrated in the far horizon, and at last day withdrew its cloak from the landscape of India, showing only the faintest glimpse of the red lining as it trailed across the far mountains. The land slept. Okay, so let's just
Yeah, Baba,
quickly
very
go.
quick, as if you are there.
Yes, so beautiful.
It's so beautiful, very visualizing it.
Yes, 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 yes. Yeah.
Which year is this actually? I missed. Maybe it must have been said earlier.
I think it is 1952, right?
1956.
56, yes.
56.
56. Yeah, 56. Thank you.
Yeah, Baba.
So I'll just go to the two appendixes. So yeah, Appendix 1 and 2. Oh yeah, this is the instructions. So these were given in 55 for the Sevas in 1956. So let's read it. Let's get into the feel of being there. So Appendix 1, directions given by Meher Baba in November 1955, particularly for the participants of the Sehwas weeks and in general for all connected with Baba. I want you to read carefully and absorb these directions as well as the other items arranged alongside. Other items mentioned were posted on a sort of bulletin board outside the hall in which most of the Savas meetings were held. Okay. The framed gist of the circular number 25 of 1/5/1955, the two charts on God and love, and number 3, the list of donations for the Sehwas weeks. The donations were made by various of the Indian devotees, is what the footnote says. Then it continues, no one, and that also includes those who have come for the Sehwas, should under any circumstances, either directly or indirectly, ask me for favors, rewards, money, jobs, health, or other material things, not even for spiritual gain. The best is not to ask for anything. If anything at all is to be asked for, then first one should ponder whether one has the required degree of determination and courage to ask for the love of Baba. If one has that much determination and courage, one should be ready to surrender so completely as literally to give up and let go of everything, body, mind, and heart. And the self should be able to remain alive and dead simultaneously. To all of you who believe and feel that I am the avatar, I say that there is no need at all to ask me for anything, because I must know best when and what to do for one and all and what to give to one and all. Your faith and belief demand then that you should feel happy to be resigned equally to whatever comes from me or whatever is taken away by me. As and when I bless anyone with peace, somebody should mute Ashok.
Sorry.
As and when I bless anyone with peace and plenty, money and children, name and fame, etc., he and others should not feel elated at this. Their concern should be only to keep their minds and hearts focused on what they believe me to be, the one reality. If I am free to give as I wish, I must also remain free to take away as and when I deem it best in any way and at any time. That also means that as and when I take anything away from anyone, he should not raise a cry, because his concern must likewise remain focused on my reality and not on the thing I take away. From the beginning of all beginnings, I have been saying, I say it now, and to the end of ends, I will say it, that he who loves God becomes God. It is a fact that I have come amongst you. One of these days, the whole world will come to realize how I have come, where I have come from, and the purpose of my coming. I repeat once again that I have come neither to establish punts and jats, groups and classes, nor to establish mandirs, masjids, churches, and ashrams in the world. I have come to receive the beauty and give the blessings of love. All else but God, whether rites, rituals, or ceremonies in the name of religion, worldly possessions, family, money, or one's own physical body, all else but God is illusion. In response to my call to one and all to leave all and come to me, some have come. A few have responded for the sake of spiritual enlightenment, others to gain peace and escape from worldly strife and entanglements, while a few have come through their love for me to find me as I am. Those who have come to me have naturally become dependent upon me, but in spite of that, I, as Baba, remain free and independent. I have been seeing to their requirements with the money which has been coming in and going out in the spirit of love. I accept with love what is offered to me with love, and I also disperse it out of love. I neither obtain money through miracles, nor am I connected with any money-making business. There are those who have offered what they can spare, and there are those who have dedicated their all to me and to my cause of love, unmindful of money for the sake of money. Under the existing conditions of no promises from me, no bindings upon me, and no undertakings by me, my dependents must also be made to feel quite free of their material dependence upon me. Thus, they will be able to maintain a pure relationship of love for the sake of love. I now wish to be outwardly what I always am inwardly, living solely in love, for love, and with love. These were the conditions laid down to Baba by his followers in Circular 25, which is referred above. In that spirit, the whole world could live with me irrespective of whether or not there happened to be any provision for food and shelter for the todays as well as for the tomorrows. As it is, I am free and no bindings touch me, but I should also be free of the need to bother about arrangements for others. I now want love to reign supreme outwardly as it always does inwardly in me. How can one explain love? There are as many ways of explaining love and obedience as there are men. There can thus be no end to the understanding of them except through obedience based on love and through love itself. All great saints, teachers, and masters say the same thing in one way or another when the emphasis is laid on love for the sake of love, or failing that, on obedience in the cause of love. For spontaneous surrender, the heart must, so to speak, be worn on one's sleeve. One must be ever ready to place one's neck under the ever-sharp knife of command of the beloved, and the head should figuratively be detached in order that it might be completely surrendered at the master's feet. Obedience should be so complete that one's concern with it makes one as much awake to possibilities as it makes one deaf to impossibilities, as envisaged by the poet. Darmiyane kahre darya, thakta bandam karda e, baad mein gu e khai, daman ter makun, hoshyar bash. I was tied to a raft and thrown in the ocean, and then I was warned to be careful not to let my robe get wet. Yet, all this does not and cannot explain the required degree of continued readiness for love and obedience to love. In fact, one of the three reasons for this sehvas is to help you grasp what love and obedience really mean. You must have such a clear picture in your mind of this sehvas as to forget completely such things as declarations, messages, and discourses by me. This is not an occasion for the fulfillment or the taking and breaking of past and future promises. You have got to remove from your minds any picture of me upon a dais and you sitting before me, as has been the experience of most of you present here. I want you to be with me, near me, and before me in an entirely different atmosphere, so that you can freely breathe the air of my personal presence. We must be together as intimately as if we were living under the same roof for no purpose other than that of living with each other and for each other. Do not look forward to any functions, meetings, timetables, programs, agendas, or any cut and dried plans. You have simply to be near me all the time that I remain with you, playing, sitting, walking, joking, discussing serious things, or listening to stories. I want you to live with me the day-to-day life I normally lead. You are not expected to read, study, meditate, or pray, but to feel at home with me as naturally and unreservedly as you do at home in the midst of your own family and friends. I want you to be your natural selves, putting aside all the superficial niceties one usually assumes in social life. Being in my company, watching me, and being watched by me, you will automatically learn and unlearn a lot which no amount of teaching can convey. In short, there are three reasons for this Sehvas program. To give you my closest company in order to bring out the oneness between us, to help you understand love and obedience, and to make you imbibe these twin aspects of the nectar of the infinite existence behind all life. And third, to show you how to do my work of spreading love. However much I may explain, you cannot have a true idea of the enormous strain on my physical body in these last 12 months. To say the least, I'm utterly exhausted physically, yet I intend to exert myself further for the whole Sehvas month in order to impress thoroughly upon you certain points. There are points which I've got to drive in deeper and deeper, not only for you all who are able to be near me physically, but for all others also who love me and obey me, as well as for others, as well as for other reasons which are not apparent here and now. These points you will have to grasp through the three reasons of the Sehvas as given above. Therefore, during the 7 days, above everything else, forget your worries, comforts, discomforts, home and business affairs. In short, forget about everything concerning your daily life except your present life here with me. As I have stated, I have offered this Sehvas at the cost to me of additional physical exertion because of all who love me and obey me including those who are physically absent. The only explanations you should expect from me during the Sahvas will be on love, 2, on obedience, 3, work of spreading my love, and 4, freedom from the apparent binding of those dependent on me. I want you all to take particular note that I would feel happy if each one of you not only possessed but read and digested God Speaks from the first to the last page as the last book of its kind by me. I will likewise be happy if those amongst you who can possibly do so will see that this work is translated and made available in as many languages as possible for those who cannot read and understand English. That's Appendix 1. Beautiful again. It's like almost we are there.
Is worth reading once in a week
Yes.
in person, and then feeling okay, we were not there in 1956, but we can kind of develop a feeling that we are in the Sahvas with Baba and follow his.
Indeed.
Yeah. So that maybe role play or mock play, whatever we call it.
True.
Beautifully written, actually. Love.
Beautifully written. Absolutely.
Jai Baba.
Absolutely, Sanjay. Sanjay, I just want to point out it's November 1955, and to your question, it says even those who are not physically present there. So this relates even to us, is what I can
Yes.
infer.
And his stress on love is so much revealing here, actually, in these messages.
Absolutely.
Jai Baba.
Jai Baba.
So we are almost out of time. So we'll take up Appendix 2 in the coming week and then go to Chapter 2. Meanwhile, those of you who can't resist waiting and want to experience the Sahvas on a daily basis, feel free to enjoy the audiobooks. They are just lovely. I've shared the link on Telegram, so feel free to listen to those ahead of the time we get to the reading. The first part is just about the Sahvas, so it's more set in a narrative, and probably we will just be reading also without breaks and discussions, and just absorb and experience how it would be to be there. But I think the next part is where there is the expositions on the topics, which we can obviously deliberate and discuss as well.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's so beautifully and simply written and explained by Baba. It needs no discussion, actually. It's just absorption.
Yes.
That is needed.
Yes. Coming from discourses and God Speaks, this is a light read.
Jai Baba.
Light, emotional read. Jai Baba, Namita.
Jai Baba, you know, when I read this for the first time, I had goosebumps, you know. It almost felt like that we were part of the rest of the Mandali. It felt so real. And
Yes,
he's
yes.
described it so beautifully, you know. It really today also it feels like we are part of the whole group. It's so beautifully written, and at least to me it just talks to me, you know. It's really incredible. Very nice.
No,
Thank you.
especially the audiobook. It's like almost you're there. It's
yeah.
just lovely.
It's so nice. No, actually, you read it well as well.
Audiobook means you mean Don Stevens' narration?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
So that's really beautiful. Very, very beautiful. It's like you're there.
That's true.
Right?
Very true.
Yeah.
Very true.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. It's so beautiful. Really, this is a lovely morning.
Lovely morning, indeed.
Thank you.
So,
Karthik, you brought it alive, sir. Almost we felt we were there.
Yes,
that's the beauty of this. That's the beauty of this book compared to what we read in discourses, and it looks like he's talking to us idiots, you know.
Yes.
So that's so sweet.
And
yeah.
Thanks to Baba that you made us read this book. Actually, yesterday we were debating what to read, and I think he has given us the best gift.
Yeah, and you know, after getting all this knowledge for a year and a half, then you know, something in you always feels, I wish I had seen Baba in life. And this almost fulfills that desire, you know. It's
That's
so
a good one.
beautiful.
Yeah,
It's so
yeah.
beautiful. Thank you very much. Thank you,
Correct.
Baba.
Jai Baba.
That's true. That's true. Yeah. So we
Jai
have
Baba.
been ushered in by all the messages and discourses, and God speaks, and now we are enjoying the intimate company of Baba through Listen Humanity.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you very
Yes.
much. You have a good day.
Yes, likewise, and look forward to seeing you all next week. Have a great week ahead, and Jai Baba, everybody.
Yes.
Jai Baba.
Jai
Remain,
Baba.
remain
Baba.
absorbed,
Jai Baba.
remain absorbed and drowned in the message.
Abide in Baba,
Yeah.
our
Jai Baba.
innermost loving self. Jai Baba. Jai
Jai
Baba.
Baba.